a very simple expression and something that I like to try to live by and try to instill in others. I think it's described and talked about in our gospel reading today, can very simply summed up with good boundaries make for good relationships. Good boundaries make for good relationships. And that means our relationship with ourselves, it means our relationship with others in community, and it means our relationship with God. That we have good boundaries, expectations, perhaps sometimes limitations, really helps us to be the best people that we can be, so that we're not just wandering and we're lost, but rather we're guided by God's providence, by the gift of prayer, and by the way in which God places us here on this earth to do a mission. And we are called to do so always in a way that makes Him proud. That's why Jesus was very clear today in the gospel about what those who were being sent out should and should not do. He didn't just go and say, it's a free-for-all, folks. Have a wonderful time. Go preach the gospel, do whatever you want, no rules, no boundaries. It's like living in a home. We have guidelines, we have things that kind of help us, whether we're children, spouses, elderly living in a home. It does not matter. We're called upon to be able to get along together. So Jesus gives these guidelines today. He gives a mission. He sends them out, hoping that they can do their very best. There's three in particular items, specifics that he mentions that I think are important for us so that we can live the Christian life and journey not just to preach the gospel here on earth, but to journey one day to heaven. The first one talks about what to bring. What should we have in our hands? What should be on our person? How is it that we are called to go forth to preach the gospel and live the Christian life? Notice, he didn't say to them, you can bring up to 50 pounds, and after that you get charged $100 for every 10 pounds over that. No, he didn't. He said, bring nothing. Bring nothing. Because by bringing nothing, when they go to a place, they won't be tempted to have to feel that they had to give something. Rather, Jesus was challenging them to give themselves. The best thing that they had to give and to offer was their own person. It was their message. It was their witness. It was their love. It was their wisdom. So he said, go forth, bring nothing with you except one thing, and that's a walking stick. Now, why a walking stick? Well, a lot of hills there in the Holy Land, a lot of places with rocks where maybe they could trip. The walking stick gives something to lean on, something to be able to help keep balance. And so he wanted them to have balance in their life. Also, the walking stick represents trust. It represents trust in God, in His providence, and in the one who is leading us. So if they have the walking stick with them, they realized that God was leading them further. And it was the gift of His will which would help them get there to where He wanted them to be. We can learn from that also, because God's will for us can be very corrective. If perhaps we need to realize we're not on the right path, it can also be very affirming. But that walking stick is the gift of trust, of God saying, trust in me. But bring nothing else with you. Don't weigh yourself down, because you as a human person, you who have been created by God, along with your parents as co-creators, on the day that you were knit in your mother's womb, you have something to offer. And it's not what we always have on the outside or the resources that we have to give. It's inside. And each one of us has something extremely precious and valuable to offer. Secondly, he tells them, don't go alone. I want you to go out 2 by 2. You know, probably if they were sent out alone, they could have been faster. Maybe they would have been able to go see more people, maybe affect more lives. But he said, don't go alone I don't want you to be on your own. I need you to have a spiritual companion. That means a friend, an associate. That means maybe a coworker, a neighbor, a family member, someone from the clergy, someone that you look to and that helps you in your journey. That you are not alone, but go out 2 by 2. Because if you're alone, you're also not accountable. You see, in Genesis, God was brilliant when he said, you are not to be alone. Man is not to be alone, but he created woman so that they would be together. That just doesn't refer only to marriage, but it refers to community. It refers to us living together as people so that we work together, and the load is a little bit lighter when people do it together. So it even comes and helps us with our own spiritual life today, because look around, you're not alone in this church. You're not alone in the gift of faith. I kind of laugh when I hear people say, well, I'm a spiritual person, but I don't need to go to church. No, God said in Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. So the gift of community, of church, the gift of being together, the gift of going 2 by 2 says you're not doing it on your own, but you do it as a family, as people called to be working together on that mission of Christ. Because we learn a lot about ourselves when we work with other people. And that can be very humbling, can also be very productive, and it also can be very enlightening, because others help us discover who we really are, who God created us to be. And finally, the Lord is pretty clear by saying to them that when they go forth, that when they go out, that they are called upon to be able to do so in a manner in which they do it with joy. To be able to do so that they realize that they may not always be accepted. He says to them, you're going to go to some places, but you might get the door slammed in your face. But don't be paralyzed by that failure, but rather move on to the next town. Shake the dust off your feet. So don't get caught up in the drama, but get caught up in what other opportunities there are. Get caught up in what it is that is still beyond. Because each one of us in our lives, we have failures. Each one of us have things maybe we would do better, but we always have to realize that there's something beyond. There's always hope for the better tomorrow. So by saying, go forth, but realize that not everyone's going to like you. And that's pretty hard to believe, that not everyone's going to like you. But it's the truth. And when we look at things, we may see it looks great on paper, but when people get involved, it gets complicated. And so he's giving also a way of conflict resolution. He's saying, don't get involved and bogged down by arguing with people, because they're not going to listen to you, but shake the dust off your feet and move on. The dust can be perhaps the dirtiness in our life. Maybe the dust is the cloud that comes in a relationship, but we're called upon to let it go. We don't want it to pollute our lungs. We don't want the dust to irritate our skin. We don't want the dust to be able to mar and to dirty or put filth in our spiritual life. But he said, leave it behind. Go forth. So today, as we hear this, it's good for us to remember the walking stick, we're not alone, and shake the dust off. Because these are tools that help us in the journey. And folks, we're not just wanderers here on this earth. We are pilgrims. We are missionaries. Pope Francis often speaks of missionary discipleship. That means we don't just come here to church on Sunday, take it in, absorb it, consume. We're called to go forth. We're called to go out into the world. So from the moment you step out of this church, it means you have to be nice in the parking lot. It means that if you go to the restaurant, you be generous to those that are good to you. You get good service, you be generous back. It means in your family, you pray for patience. It means that where there's rough spots in relationships, you ask for God's grace to come in and smooth out the valleys and the peaks so that there's stability. It means that we are called to be his disciples today in 2018. And when we do so and realize that we are on a mission, and maybe we don't yet know what that mission is, then in the quiet of your heart today, even after communion, start asking God, God, what do you want me to do? The words of our opening hymn, "Here I am, Lord. Send me, I come to do your will." Wonderful words. If you don't know what God's will is, then start asking here and now. Because I know he's going to tell you, when the Lord speaks, we're called to listen. And we listen in a manner which helps us to grow in faith, in hope, and in love, to one day be with the communion of saints in the heavens. But one way we're going to get there is always to realize that good boundaries make for good relationships.